Boys and Girls is the 15th episode of the second season of The Office. This is directed by Dennie Gordon, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And I thought this was a pretty decent episode. The main narrative focuses on the fact that Jan has come to the office to visit, and she's giving the women a kind of talk, kind of seminar. It's a very strange situation, and I feel like she was there for their benefit, but honestly, if I had been in that situation, it would have just felt really uncomfortable. And I'll talk more about what they talk about in a moment. Michael keeps trying to butt in on the conversation, but ultimately ends up taking the guys down to the warehouse for a guy's version, basically. And it gets very messy, and they have fake snow. Dwight makes a fake snow angel at one point. It's a very different environment, but I thought it was a nice way to include the guys in the narrative, and I thought it worked quite well. But we did have one awkward moment down in the warehouse. Well, maybe a few, but one in particular where Roy says that actually he is aware that Jim used to have a crush on Pam, and he's cool with it. Yeah, it's cool that he's cool with it. He seems like somebody who, on the one hand, he seems very much like he doesn't actually care about Pam, but at the same time, I feel like he could have come across as being quite possessive of her at the same time. So I was surprised that he was just very cool with it. It's not what I expected, but I do think it was the right attitude to have. And we'll go back to the women in a moment, but the guys end up deciding they want to have a union. They chant Michael's name at one point, which, needless to say, Michael was very happy about, and Jan very quickly tells them all of the reasons why forming a union would be a bad idea. And that's basically what happens with the guys' part. We are then with Jan and the women, and I will say we cut back and forth between the two groups at a really decent rate. We never feel like we're jumping around too much, but we never spend too much time in one place that it starts to get stale. I think the pacing was very effective, very well done, and the girls end up having to talk about the things that they're good at. Pam actually mentions that she enjoys drawing, and it kind of made me realise we don't really know that much about most of the characters' lives outside of work. It's not something we know a lot about at this stage, so that was quite interesting. And Jan suggests that Pam does this internship in graphic design that the company can definitely help her set up. Pam tries to make some excuses about why the weekends are not very good for this, but she's sitting with the idea, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. The women then also talk about clothing and inequality of pay, and it just definitely feels like an awkward environment. And I feel like they knew how to play the situation, because they start talking about Jan's brief encounter with Michael, basically very quickly managing to get out of this awkward situation. And we then have, I think, a couple of really telling moments with Pam, and something I've mentioned before many times is that I'm so desperate for something to happen between Pam and Jim, or just for something to happen to break up Pam and Roy, because I don't like him. He's not good for her. Even if Pam doesn't want to jump into a relationship with Jim, I want her to realise that Roy isn't treating her right. And when she tells Jim about this internship, he's quite supportive, but it turns out she'd already mentioned it to Roy, and his response was basically, well, nothing might even come of it, so what's the point? Which is pretty much what I would have expected from him. And we have a tiny argument between Pam and Jim, where Jim basically asks her, do you want to be a receptionist forever? And are you happy with your choices? And she says that she is. And then she's talking to the camera a little while later and basically ends up crying and having to put her hand over her face, and we only see that for a tiny second, but I think it's very eye-opening, and I think hopefully a sign that Pam is starting to realise that maybe because she's been so fixated on Roy finally setting a date for a wedding, that she's not allowed herself to actually ask if it's what she really wants, and maybe now she's questioning that. We'll see. Hopefully we'll get some more information soon enough. Really looking forward to that. And for now, I thought Boys and Girls was a pretty decent episode of The Office.